Thank you everyone for being on this call. We are honored to have Gigi Crowder and Stephen Renner on the call. They are with our NAMI Contra Costa County chapter. Gigi Crowder, LE, is the Executive Director of Contra Costa, and it's National Alliance on Mental Illness, the country's largest advocacy organization for people with mental health illnesses and their families. Before NAMI, Gigi worked 10 years at Alameda County's Behavioral Health Services with Ethnic Services Manager, where she pushed to provide programs for Black, Asians, LGBTQ, and Latinx people, and taught implicit bias training to police. A woman of great faith, she also chairs a statewide initiative to integrate faith, spirituality into mental health treatment. Thank you, Gigi. The floor is yours.
Thanks for having me, and thanks all of you all who made the best choice for which workshop you would go to today. The one that will remind you you are a winner. So I'm happy to be here. Eugenia has given you my bio, but we're gonna give you a little bit more information. Moving to the second page. And be patient with me as I go through these PowerPoint presentations, okay? So yes, as Eugenia said, I'm currently the Executive Director of NAMI Contra Costa County. I worked for many years in Alameda County, but lived in Contra Costa County. So when my assignment in Alameda County ended, I was really pleased to find a new family at NAMI Contra Costa County and started working with them. I also was able to find a place where I could advance some of the work I was doing in Alameda County, because I'm also the founder of Black Minds Matter Too. I remind people that when African Americans live with mental health challenges, sometimes they get their services in the most restrictive environments with pretty poor outcomes. So while working in the role as the Ethnic Services Manager in Alameda County, I became committed to improving outcomes for all families, but sometimes there's a public health approach where if you work with the community that has a lot of the disparities, a lot of the poor outcomes, you actually wind up benefiting all communities. So that's what I'm doing. For 2020, my primary focus has been working on launching an effort to promote a non-police response for individuals experiencing mental health crisis. I do this because of a tragedy that took place in our county in Walnut Creek, California. So we'll move on and we'll get into this presentation. Move the slide on. And Eugenia also mentioned the fact that I'm the current chair of the California Mental Health and Spirituality Initiative. And the Mental Health and Spirituality Initiative was started in Alameda County by a peer survivor, Jay Mahler. He pulled together subject matter experts and asked them to help him advance the effort, because we recognize when individuals are in mental health distress, they often first turn to their faith communities as their preferred first responders. So what we found when we did a survey for that group, we had counties all contribute some dollars, and it positions us to do a statewide survey. We did it in all of the threshold languages. So Cantonese, Vietnamese, English, Spanish, Tagalog, and some other, I think there was a total of 15 languages. And then we were also able to have some counties do more specific surveys within their own county. But one thing we found was that more than 90% of the county's behavioral health directors responded and strongly agreed that spirituality is an important recovery resource in mental health treatment. And if they hadn't agreed to that, it still would not have been a problem for me, because peers and family members also agreed that it's important. It's an important wellness resource in mental health prevention. That was a 94% statistically would, and there was over 2,200 surveys. So that was a pretty fair statewide sampling. Also, it was agreed at 98% that spirituality is an important element of multicultural competency for mental health providers. So in order to work with communities, you have to understand what's important to them. Often their faith and spirituality is important to them. So 98%. We'll move to the next slide. So like, oh, wow, I said 2,200. Look, I made a mistake. I'm one of those people who can say, oops, it was 2,600 respondents. Of those 2,600 respondents, 88% of the African-American mental health consumers and family members that we surveyed said that faith and spirituality was important to them. 72% reported that they believe it's appropriate for our public mental health system to address spirituality as a part of mental health care, okay? That's a pretty decent number. 89 reported that they regularly use prayer as a wellness tool. So that should really come as a surprise to anybody who's on this call. Prayer is actually one of the most important evidence-based practice. Misunderstood, but it is one of them. Okay, we're gonna move to the next slide. So because I was working in the role of the ethnic services manager in Alameda County, I thought it was really important for me to use a strategy that would work for me to make advancement in all the ethnic communities, but the one that I primarily focused on initially, because remember I said using a public health platform, if you work with the community that suffers most, you can often identify strategies that can be employed in all communities. So the mental health friendly communities model was developed at my desk in Alameda County, and then I brought on a partner, Minister Monique Tarver, who worked in Alameda County as our spirituality liaison, and then a pastor, because as we started doing work in the African-American faith community, we quickly realized that if we were going to make any inroads, we probably needed to have an African-American male pastor. And that's when Pastor Horacio Jones joined us. And we had the opportunity through the Each Mind Matters campaign to be the contractors working with Hill and Company to advance efforts on reducing stigma and discrimination for people who live with mental illness. And so we had an opportunity to work in Alameda County, Contra Costa County, Fresno, Kings County, Sacramento, San Bernardino, Santa Clara, Solano. We still have a contract in Solano and Alameda, and then Stanislaus County. And we made great impact by working with their faith leaders, teaching them how to better respond to individuals who sought them out first when in distress. And the name of our work, our little agency under the CDC and Family Bible Fellowship in Newark, California, is Mental Health Friendly Communities. And it is my goal and desire to create mental health friendly communities across the state, nation, and globally. Next slide, please. Okay. As part of our training for the mental health friendly communities, we have signature trainings, and our most often requested is our mental health one-on-one for African Americans. I've developed these for other communities, and I use what I call cultural brokers from each of those communities when I advance it for those other ethnic and cultural communities. But for the African American one, we look at the 5 most common mental health diagnoses, and we wind up saying, this is what schizophrenia looks like, and this is how it might manifest itself in the African-American community. And this is some of the treatments tools you could use if you want to use what I call community-defined strategies in addressing the concerns that individuals experience when they live with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, ADHD, or any of the other more severe mental health challenges. Then we have spirituality one-on-one, because if we're training faith leaders to be more equipped to support individuals, there is going to be a time when they need to bridge the gap between the clinical and the spiritual. So we have to teach providers how to recognize the importance of faith and spirituality in these communities. And we do that through this training, working with an individual, Dr. David Lukoff, setting the foundation for the historical connection between faith and spirituality. Then we have a training that I'll talk more about today called I'm a Winner. And then I put every kid, student, child needs an IEP. Some of you who work in the education field might say, why would every kid need an IEP? Well, you have to stick around to find out. So I will share that with you. And then we do a training called Keepers of the Flock that lays the responsibility on the faith community using the parable of the lost sheep, that when one sheep is lost, remember there was 100 sheep and 99 made it back into the pen and one didn't. And we talk about the fact that it was not the responsibility of the sheep to make it back, but the shepherd. So when one individual is off their meds and maybe unsheltered and not doing well, it's all of our responsibility to go find that one sheep, support them back to wellness, and have the party as mentioned in that scripture when that one is back in the fold. And then the Bridge Over Troubled Water is a training that we do that chronicles the journey from slave ships through the White House, and the important role faith and spirituality plays for African Americans historically, through Reconstruction, through the Civil Rights Movement. When there had been progress made in the African American community, largely it's been when the faith community has supported the efforts and made an effort to advance the advocacy and bills and laws being put into place to better support healing and mental wellness for the community. So the Bridge Over Troubled Water lays the foundation for that being so important. Next slide, please. Seeking support from all allies. So whenever you're doing any kind of work that may be a little kind of different from the norm, you always have to look at your allies. And so we started in Alameda County with calling all faith leaders, and I think I worded it like, all faith leaders interested in improving mental health outcomes, please come to this meeting. And so they came. We actually held the first one at Allen Temple, and it was a large group of faith leaders and clergy from across the diverse faith and spiritual belief practices. We quickly learned that day that there's more similarities than differences, and so we were able to do our work. I often will get a proclamation from the Board of Supervisors when we're doing this work in counties, because they're the top leaders, top decision makers, and if they give you the buy-in, later, when someone says you can't do it, you can always point to that proclamation. So we go October, the first week in October and the first Tuesday of each October is Mental Health Day of Prayer. And that's generally when I go and get the proclamations from each county. I looked for other allies as well. Sometimes when you're doing this kind of work, you have to just identify important allies. And so the family members and peers and providers who believed in this work became allies. What's often missing when you're advancing efforts for mental health is the faith community. So again, I made sure I had found the missing link and why we don't have the improved health outcomes in mental health is usually because faith community is a natural resource that's often overlooked, but not in NAMI. NAMI actually has a faith net because they realized early on, more than other organizations, the important role faith and spirituality play. We'll move on to the next slide. I have Stephen Renner helping me out with this. So as part of my effort with mental health friendly communities, the primary goal was to create mental health friendly congregations, parishes, temples, etc. And it's a local congregation committed to eliminating stigma and improving outcomes. For this work is for the African American consumers and family members through social connection, spiritual inclusion in the life and in all facets of the ministries and the programs that are delivered by that faith community. So sometimes you'll see a church, because we're talking about the African American community, and 88% of African Americans identify with Christianity, 88% in this country. And so if you're doing a service at a church and they have a health fair, you want to make sure there's someone there to also address mental health. That's really important. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Thank you, Stephen. Why did I start doing this work? Because I had worked in the mental health field for a very long time. I'll say the word blessed to have a opportunity to work in what is called the clubhouse model. And so I worked and saw individuals that never really thought a lot about ethnic disparities or where a person landed. But then a report came out in 1999, the Surgeon General report on mental health, and it uncovered the disparities that exist in ethnic populations. At that time, they didn't include the LGBTQ community, but they talked specifically about ethnic populations, and it addressed the fact that African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and the Latin, we call it Latinx now, but it was Hispanic Latino communities, had some major health disparities. Really poor outcomes. Some of it was language barriers, but a lot of it was steeped in structural racism, practices that should not happen anymore, but continue to happen, that put individuals at a disadvantage. And for the African American community, too often their services are delivered in the most restrictive environments, and too often they're criminalized for living with what is essentially a medical condition, right? Because a mental health diagnosis means that a person has a medical condition. So we definitely wanted to address that. And then in 2004, here comes the Mental Health Services Act passed, and the Mental Health Services Act prevention and early intervention had particular guidelines. So while working in Alameda County, the guidelines said you must be working with unserved and underserved. In most systems of care in California and beyond, African Americans have a lot of services, but they're inappropriately addressed if they're not addressing them in a manner consistent with producing the better outcomes, which for me is using community-defined strategies. So we went to our county leadership and we started, because remember, I identified these allies. So it wasn't just me. We went to our county leadership and we were given funds to pull together what we call the Alameda County African American Utilization Report. I'm one who would rather focus on how to fix a problem than the problem. So this was an attempt for us to identify goals and recommendations that could be employed in Alameda County to improve the outcomes for African Americans. And in doing so, we went through a process, which I'll go to the next page and I'll share a little bit more with you for this African American Utilization Report. We had 28 individuals who came together and they represented a diverse lens of individuals. On the next page, you'll see that that our purpose was to identify the issues and concerns that are there for people who live with mental health as well as substance abuse in the African American community. And we want to provide recommendations to make the services more effective and culturally honoring. Here it says culturally appropriate because back then I was okay with the word appropriate. Now I like the word culturally honoring because who decides what's appropriate? Because I'm African American and a female and of a certain age, it does not mean that I have all the answers for African American women, right? So appropriate has to have more flexibility, and so it can shift depending on your living experience. And I think that whenever anyone calls and asks me if I'll speak on behalf of African American women, I accept it with the caveat I can speak with individuals who have my similar living experience. Then so supporting Alameda County, they often would put this in there when you're doing work. We had to do this understanding that we had limited funding to do so. So that was that. And that picture is actually not the picture of an African-American support group. That's a picture of a group of individuals who took a training to reduce health disparities. And so it represents a wide variety of individuals from a wide variety of cultural backgrounds, because remember, the goal here is that you make improvements for one group, you benefit all groups. Next slide. Okay. What we wanted to do initially was start off by looking at the biases and inaccurate diagnosis that African Americans experience when they enter into the mental health, when they're getting diagnosis. It's really important to understand that too often African Americans get the more severe diagnosis, especially African American men. There's black and white and no gray. So a lot of times African-American men in particular rarely get diagnosed with anxiety and depression, but it jumps all the way up to schizophrenia with violent features. And, it's kind of like a hopeless diagnosis. So we wanted to look at that as well. We wanted to look at the disparities and how individuals of the African-Americans are overrepresented in restrictive involuntary settings, yet they have some of the most inconsistent outcomes, even though there's a large amount of money spent, but it's spent, as I said earlier, in an inappropriate manner, so it does not produce the great outcomes. And we looked at societal factors, cultural stigma, historical trauma, and discrimination, okay? And then we went on and we looked at how services are often piecemeal. And so sometimes you get incorrect medication because the doctors from your primary care are not communicating with your doctor from your mental health. And too often, a lot of times when people get mental health diagnoses, they're treated above the net. The sad truth is that individuals who live with mental health challenges die anywhere from 15 to 20 years earlier than the general population. And then when they're African American, that number can increase to 25 to 30. I actually have a picture from when I worked at the clubhouse in 1983 through 2000. I worked at a clubhouse, townhouse in Oakland, and I have a picture, and most of the individuals who were probably back then in their 40s to 50s are no longer with us anymore. And that saddens me, and that also motivates me to do this work, because that's a social justice issue that we have not fully addressed as a society, that living with a mental illness can predict your life expectancy being shortened. That shouldn't happen. And then here where it says need for non-behavioral health community supports, primarily when I wrote this and delivered it to the administrators, I meant a need to work more with faith communities. And this is the translation that it came out with the administration, because there are other non-behavioral health supports that should be in place. So as I said before, we had 28 people on our stakeholder group. We worked with the Board of Supervisor Liaison. We had county staff, CBOs, criminal justice, advocacy groups such as family and consumer advocacy groups, medical providers, and faith-based organizations. For our work, we utilize the state's approach, which is to break individuals up into groups. So what they generally do is they go from age birth to 16, and that's the group we're going to focus on. But you'll note for African American traditional age youth, I jumped it to 29 because too often when African Americans, they get their diagnosis 5 to 6 years later than the general population. So they wind up getting it after 24, 25, and they're no longer eligible for services. So I thought that's unfair. So even though it didn't matter, it's not going to have a whole lot of impact. I just wanted to let folks know that does happen. So we'll move on now to the next slide. And we did a lot of research and evaluation. We used subject matter experts. I had mentioned before, we had the focus groups. We generally had them at the Soul Food Restaurant in San Leandro, California. And we had the fried chicken, the macaroni cheese, and the yam. So I gained about 20 pounds while doing this work, but it was all worth it in the end because we got some great outcomes, and that's what I'm going to share with you next. Starting on the next slide, we're going to talk about the landscape for African American students who are more likely to be suspended from school than any other group, and at an alarming rate. And since we did this report in 2011, so I would love to say that, oh, we need to do it again, but not much has changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Now we're seeing that preschoolers, African American preschoolers, are 5 times more likely to get kicked out of preschool than any other group. Nationally, 63% of African Americans view depression as a personal weakness, so there's not always this support for even our youth when they're having a difficult time and may have symptoms of depression. And co-occurring disorders, or what I call self-medication, affects about 70% of all behavioral health care consumers. And the statistics that we have looked at, that bears true across the board. So there was no significant that African Americans are more likely to self-medicate. Although the media will share with you that African Americans tend to have more substance abuse. We know now with the opioid addiction affecting middle America and white Americans more, that those statistics just not have held up as true. So have to be real careful with the media. And then fewer than 4% of social workers and only 2% of psychologists in the US are African American. However, here in California, those numbers are greatly enhanced. And so when we're talking about reducing disparities, we also have to look at making efforts to hire people reflective of the communities that they're serving. And in most county systems, there's a lot of African Americans receiving services, so we can do a whole lot better with having and hiring a reflection of that. And there's a lot of African American social workers just wanting to come and support their community. So hiring practice have to reflect that. Next slide, please. Okay, so what do youth need to feel good about themselves? Love, understanding, and compassion, right? And especially true when they live with mental health challenges. So I have a coworker, actually he's staff for us now, and he said kids not only need to be told they're loved, they have to be told they're lovable. And that's really true. Sometimes just telling a person that you love them, they need to feel it. So they need to feel lovable. So that's some of the work we're doing with I'm a Winner. Next slide. So this is pretty standard across all counties, that there's inappropriate diagnosis, there's overrepresentation for African Americans in the foster care system. So there's a lot of out-of-home placement, and our juvenile justice systems. I'm pleased to hear that crime for youth has gone down in recent years, and overall violent crimes, it has gone down in Contra Costa County where I'm at, and I'm hoping that's true across the state. The youth and their family have to be able to provide the historical background so that people can put this into context. Too often, decisions are made for individuals without the context for the background, right? I use an example of wanting to be like that A student. I have 4 other sisters, and they all had a role to play. One was the prettiest, one played sports, one could do hair real well, and they all had a role. So I decided as the 4th girl, I would be the smartest. So in my 2nd grade class, I went in a class and I asked my teacher for extra work, and she gave the whole class this assignment where we were to go home and come back and tell what time we went to bed, and just other type of more, what I said, subjective and objective kind of questions. That I came home and I looked at the clock and I recognized that we went to bed at 8:45 every night, or that's when my mother started telling us to get in bed. We didn't always make it there. And I came back and I handed that paper to my teacher, and she put a check mark, meaning it was incorrect. And I was like, oh no, wait a minute. What do you mean incorrect? We do go to bed at 8:45 or 9 o'clock roughly at that time. She said that was far too late to go to bed. That's when my spirit was crushed, because I was going to be the perfect 100% student, But what happened was that teacher looked at what worked for her lifestyle, didn't consider my culture where both my parents worked, that my mom didn't get off of work till 5. My dad worked in San Francisco. We lived in Oakland. He didn't get home till 6:30. We didn't eat dinner, and my mother did her homework with us. And so her value that kids should be in bed at 7:30 clashed with my reality. And so do I go back and tell my mother she's a bad parent because she didn't have us going to bed until, at least 45 minutes later than what the white American teacher thought was appropriate? Do I keep questioning my mother's judgment about how she would raise her kids? Or do I learn how to what? Give individuals what they want to get the grade I want, but deny myself, right, the truth about how our family operated. And so often that happens in the classroom, where there's not this understanding of the differences in families based on societal differences and opportunities. So that's what happened. I luckily figured it out. What happens when a student doesn't figure it out? Then they're going to be in conflict with the teacher because they're looking at the clock and it's right? That's the time they're going to bed, but the teacher is saying you're wrong. The way you're doing it is wrong. So that sets up what I call spiritual hurt at very young age. And that's a mild example for me, but that's one that I remember. There's many other examples like that where kids' spirits are broken in the classroom, and then they decide maybe they don't have what it takes to be the first African-American president or whatever. But we know how important it is to build children up. So we have some pretty, harsh statistics here. There was an urgent report issued by SAMHSA in July of 2019 that pointed to the suicide rates amongst African-American children, 5 to 11, and that it an increase. In 1993, it was 13% of the cause, 13th for the cause of death, and then today is 10th cause of death for African-American children. So, there's work to be done, because I like to see that number, of course, go back up so it's not so prevalent. Next slide. So the recommendations we came up with for children, African-American children and youth, was we need to promote clarifying assessment and community-based and utilize community-based consultants. If you do not understand how African-Americans socialize, how they learn, how they embrace the world and their approaches to doing traditional healing and practices, then you need to clarify it. Often when we were little, and my mom, toward the end of the month, when we ran out of cookies and cakes, my mom would make something that's called a rice pudding. And she put sugar on rice. Well, rice is already a starch. So some people would be like, oh, wow. Well, she wanted to make sure her children had a dessert. And so she gave us that. And that was the low budget approach to doing that. Now, some parents, some individuals might feel like that's, you don't do that. That's too high in sugar content. But you have to look at what she stirred up into that was love. She wanted us to always have dessert. So another clarifying assessment might be if a young African-American kid lives in a neighborhood where there's a lot of violence, and some of the behaviors that they're exhibiting are survival behaviors. So if they jump under the desk when they hear a loud noise, make room for the fact that that might be because of their learned behavior around survival, and not pathologize it and consider it a maladaptive behavior, and this kid is out of sorts because he's doing these odd things. A clarifying assessment with a consultant from the community who understands some of the practices in the African-American community can often clear up a lot of misunderstandings. Utilize natural resources, I already had that in there. Increase referrals and family sharing among providers. Increase inclusion of the family when making what we call treatment plans. Sometimes I've seen families who had some desire to have the children improve their skill set in a particular area, or they'd say, oh, well, you should put them on the soccer team, you should have them do this or that, without any consideration for the financial barrier that might be there, or the time commitment that the family can't make to the child doing that. Doesn't mean they love them any less, just means there's never a lack of, when we say the achievement gap, and it's an opportunity gap. It's not that kids from certain communities can't learn as well as others. It's like they have to have the opportunity to do it. So you have to remove financial barriers and others. I hear people say, oh, this group of people don't come to the PTA meetings and others do. Well, if you're a stay-at-home mom and you have dual, and you don't have, and you don't have dual incomes, and the male or female who's doing the work and can afford to stay at home, then by all means, stay at home and be there for your child. But if you need two incomes, because we have a very sexist and racist pay rate scale, then the teachers have to make allowances for that, and the school administrators need to know. You can't have a meeting at 2 p.m. and expect for parents to be there if they have to work. These are considerations you have to have in place, so you have to pick a time that works best. Next slide. So the I'm a Winner campaign was designed, there was a young man who went to a church I went to, his name is Benjamin. He's not able to join us. If he was able to, you guys would have been so blessed, because he would have done one of his spoken words. That's where he was having a difficult time and needed an outlet, which he found the arts. And so he does spoken words, but I met him at my church, and it's using the community-defined strategies. And there's an opportunity through the I'm a Winner program to pair faith communities up with schools, and rather than have a kid be sent out of the class, he would be sent into this nurturing room. It's designed to empower and equip African-American communities across the age to understand that they're winners. And it's also designed to protect our youth and reconnect them with healing. We talk about trauma-informed care, but we don't talk about the healing that needs to take place, because a child is not the worst thing that ever happened to them. You can't define them by that. You have to have opportunities to empower them. So it's designed to reduce mental health stigma and disparity and promote mental wellness using a faith-based, culturally responsive approach for our most precious commodity by pairing faith centers and local schools. So the way it worked, I got a contract from Each Mind Matters. I went to San Bernardino County, and I used some of the pastors we worked with there to identify seniors in there. And I was specific because I wanted to be multi-generational. Instead of kids who were having a difficult time being sent out of the class to the principal's office, they went to this nurturing room where they had a grandmotherly type. When you grow up in a Black family and you go to church, you realize there's always this church mother who will reach in her pocket and give you some of that church candy. It might have a little lint on it and even little cotton balls, because they didn't always have wrappers back then, but that would soothe you and make you feel special. The same concept could take place in a school setting. Instead of saying, what did you do wrong? It's like, what happened to you? We've all learned that. And they can want to please this older adult by going back in class and living up to the expectation that they are a winner and they can get it done, and they can have the support system right there on the school campus. So that's the way that program kind of worked. And why? Can you go to the next slide for me, Stephen? Thank you. Because we do not and should not have a one-size-fits-all system. And for African-American children, we do. As I said earlier, it's based on a Western approach, and it should not be. Kids, when they're having depression and having a difficult time, they're not going to say, I'm depressed, but what they will say is, I have a stomach ache. We need to listen to that, and we need to be able to provide safe spaces for them to talk to. So this is some of the challenges. Too often, African-American children, sometimes it's warranted, are diagnosed with ADHD, conduct disorders, instead of underlying depression. And it makes sense in a country where right now, especially with COVID-19 and the killing of unarmed African-American males and females, we should be looking at the fact that we could and should do things differently, and we should not rule out depression as a primary reason for why a young person is having a difficult time, when what we're experiencing in this country seems to be a direct attack on people who look like them or who they will look like as they get older. And I was going to talk a little bit about the still-faced experiment, but I think I'm running out of time. But as we're wearing these masks, be aware of the fact that the peekaboo game was invented for a reason. You really need to be able to make eye contact. And as the parents are worried about what's going on with COVID and there's more stressors, take the time, because there's this study that was done when an individual is not making contact with the baby. You know how you do peekaboo and they go, ah, well, that stimulates the baby and the baby smiles back. You need constant stimulation for young people to develop the skills around trust, and you will always be there. So I usually take a little more time with these trainings. So again, there's opportunities to empower school-age African-American children with affirmations like, I'm a winner, you're a king, you're a queen. Let's be positive. Let's give opportunities for individuals to continue embracing who they are. But I'm a woman of great faith, so not just who they are, but who they are. In our African-American faith community, we talk about belonging to God and that He has our back and that He's going to help us through any situation we have. So we have to nurture versus, we have to nurture and promote affirmations that, rather than condemn individuals exposed to trauma and have them feeling like because that happened to them, we have to move from trauma-informed care to healing-centered engagement. We have to have restorative justice approaches to supporting those youth who may get out of line. Biblically, it says where you have accountability. So if we're doing the I'm the winner approach, that young man might not feel like he has enough within himself, or that young girl, to do it for themselves, but they might do it for someone else. They might just do it for someone else. You want individuals to be accountable, but you have to do it in a nurturing, restorative justice approach that when you hurt me, you hurt the community, let's work together to rebuild the community. There are consequences, but we're not going to condemn you forever. And then mentoring. While in Alameda County, we had a training where we pulled individuals who were successfully working in social work with individuals who were at Merritt College's MAP program, and I've gotten some innovation training, and we paired them together. And some of those relationships are still happening, because sometimes it's important to see individuals who are already where you're trying to get to. So you have to be willing to have an eye for coming back and helping people get. I probably mentor about 7 individuals right now, and it's more rewarding for me. Sometimes you think you're doing something for someone else, and you get the greatest reward from the opportunities you have to support others. This needs to happen in a major way for African Americans. And I'm going to say in particular, African Americans in those teen years, because they're more open to seeing all of the injustices that are taking place for African Americans in the news. And they need to be in that place where they're starting to connect with someone who can remind them how important they are, not just to their family, but to the world, how they're gonna be individuals who are gonna set the bar real high and be the first African-American female vice president and maybe president one day. So those are the opportunities. Now we're gonna move on. And I'm gonna share why I was already doing this work before, but something happened, as I said, in Walnut Creek, California, that prompted me to raise up the ante, because I've been reading statistics about African Americans and the life expectancy, especially for African American males. And I've been reading statistics about how many individuals actually have negative encounters with law enforcement. And it's actually more people who live with mental illness are killed by law enforcement, no matter what their ethnic background. But then when you add in being African American and living with a mental illness, you're statistically, the chance that you would be shot and killed by law enforcement increased in a major way. So this is the story of Miles Hall. And I'm committed to making sure that justice is served and how we deliver mental health services for African American males. I think about the fact that he loved music, and what if he had been connected to a program that would allow him to do music as a part of healing. And rather than sitting across the table from a young social worker he couldn't connect with, what about sitting across from a social worker who had a music background, and he could do hip hop therapy, classical music therapy, and write down his feelings in songs. So we're gonna see this video, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what we're doing to improve outcomes. And I think there's supposed to be sound with this, so not quite sure where the music is. Is there opportunity for the music to come on? That's why I didn't want to do this part. Not sure where the music is.
I can hear the music, Gigi. I'm not sure why it's not playing.
I cannot hear the music. So the music is Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," and for whatever reason we can't hear it. But this is Miles Hall, who was 23 years old, had a loving family, grew up in Walnut Creek, California. And on June 2nd, 2019, his mom, Ton Hall, who couldn't be with us today, actually called Walnut Creek law enforcement with the hope that she could get support for Miles, who lives with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and was having a difficult time. So she called the day before and let law enforcement know that he may need some support. Then she called on June 2nd, and within minutes of law enforcement getting there, her precious loving son was no longer alive. And so I got a phone call from the press, and Walnut Creek only has a population of less than 2% for African Americans. Didn't matter to me. I immediately started crying because I'm a crybaby, and I found out that this young man was shot and killed. And what's amazing is her whole community came together, a real diverse community, and we're just fighting to make sure that something like what happened to Miles doesn't continue happening when people live with mental illness, that we have a better relationship with law enforcement. He actually had a desire to improve outcomes for African Americans and was a great man of faith himself. And I do this work because I know that his death should not be in vain. And even though I don't think any law enforcement officer says, oh, today when I go out, I'm gonna shoot and kill someone, I do think there needs to be a place for them to apologize when it happens. Even when you settle a lawsuit, that does not replace the financial gain, does not replace. We just want people to have a better understanding. So I'm a part of a group called Friends of Scott, Alexis, and Ton Hall. And there's the proclamation we got. One of the most important things we want to do is have a non-police response for mental illness, because we understand how important it is for individuals to when they're having a difficult time, be met with compassion, love, and care. And so that's his mom, Ton, which you guys could hear her speak, but doesn't look like that's gonna happen today. So we're gonna, every Tuesday, we show up at the Walnut Creek city council meeting and just seeking justice for Miles. Miles represents so many of our loved ones who are, even if they're not killed, they are living in jails across the state, across the nation for having a medical condition called schizophrenia. Most often when individuals are in the state, they're untreated. They're not getting medication. They're not getting support services that they may need to be more in balance. So we really want to make sure that there's a non-police response. Police officers that I work with say the majority of the time when they go out, they do not wind up giving, taking the individual for a 5150. And so then you're leaving these individuals with their parents and the person basically who called, right? Who called them. And so of course there's tension. Of course there's tension because the family member needs to start building the relationship up and kind of speaking with the individual about, you do have this issue and we need to get you help, but the individual don't feel like they have a problem. So there's these tensions that arise. However, if a social worker, a peer, a family member actually showed up, we'd be in a much better position, right? To start using quote unquote natural resources to promote it. So we'll move to the next slide and you'll have an opportunity in a future slide also. So yeah, that's what I really revved up with the Black Minds Matter too. I decided that very few people are addressing the fact that African Americans, in a county where I'm at, 13% African American, but in the criminal justice system at 54% for adults and almost 60% for youth. That for me makes no sense. We can do better. And so the Justice for Miles Hall campaign has really grown our NAMI membership. You see the green ribbon that we all have been wearing for mental health awareness. I decided to put a black ribbon behind there because until there's justice and we're addressing the disparity that exists for African Americans and for individuals who live with mental illness, who also are criminalized for living with a medical condition, I don't feel comfortable with just focusing on the mental illness and not the social justice part of it. And then that's I've been wearing the wristbands forever, the Each Mind Matters, the Black Mind Matter, and now the Miles Hall, say his name, Miles Hall. And then I'm at a protest in this other picture where I'm talking about what needs to happen. So can we go to the next slide? I'm in the speed talking part now. So there's been a lot of progress made in Contra Costa County. Walnut Creek and several other cities have put funds aside. We're trying to get the county to do the same, put funds aside so we can have the Miles Hall non-police response program. So when an individual is in crisis, they can expect to be addressed at the level they need. Police officers may train for about a year in the academy. Social workers train for 4, 6, 8, sometimes 10 years to have the skill set to work effectively with people. There's an imbalance and it's not fair to law enforcement and it's not fair to individuals not to get the best services that they, that they need and desire. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, the I'm a Winner program adjusts for opportunities for local seniors to work in classroom settings. We're gonna reduce stigma. I told you I was gonna say, we reduce stigma if every student has an individualized empowerment plan. You have some kids leave out the classroom because they need an individual educational plan where everyone needs to feel empowered. Every student of every color, of every background, at every age needs an empowerment plan. Some students do well academically, some do socially. This would allow for less stigma if everyone. And then when you're talking about African Americans, we always talk about pushing STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, instead of introducing what I call high STEM, which is in order for anyone to advance, they have to know someone who looked like them with a similar background has also been able to master. So that's where we get history. And then they got to know that they're creative individuals and they can make it happen. So there's innovation. So prior to pushing STEM, let's also push history and the innovative part, and working with the youth around goal setting and the rites of passages that build people up. What I appreciate about the Jewish community is the celebrations where the individuals come all around and support individuals into having an opportunity to be told, you're going to do this and we're going to help you do it. That's a beautiful, beautiful ceremony, the bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah. And I need to move on. And so now we won't have time for Q&A. Sorry about that. We're going to move on to Bishop Carlton Leonard. So we're going back to that page, and he's going to come on. If you see him in the chat room, please allow him to come in, because Bishop Carlton Leonard, if I was at his church when I came up with the I'm a Winner campaign, and he created a song for it. So Eugenia, Stephen, can you find Carlton Leonard and highlight him, please? I know he's here because I let him in. Can you unmute yourself, Bishop Leonard, in this last 3 minutes that we have, 4 minutes that we have? Can you?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me. Do you just want me to start?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Sing along. You're on mute, but it's the rhythm of the song.
With psychological, emotional enemies, and come what may, no matter what they say, I'm always moving forward. No surrender, no retreat, no taking me off. Ain't no easy feat, cause greater is He that's living inside of me. I'm a winner like the money team. All eyes are on me, and at the end of the day, just you wait and see that I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight. I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight.
I'ma be all right.
I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight. I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight. Now, life is full of hard experiences and adversity, and you haven't lived one day of my life, so don't judge me. I know I'm in a battle, it's the fight of my life, and if it go the distance, I'ma still win this fight, cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner.
I am.
Cause I'm a winner. Come on, sing it with me. Cause I'm a winner. I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. I'ma be all right.
I'ma win this fight.
And I'ma win this fight.
And I'ma be all right.
I'ma be all right.
And I'ma win this
And
fight.
I'ma win this fight. I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight. I'ma be all right. And I'ma win this fight. Now, the enemy is busy throwing his best shots, trying to knock me out with everything that he's got. But come what may, no matter what they say, I'm always moving forward. No surrender, no retreat, no taking me home. Ain't no easy feat, cause greater is He that's living inside of me. I'm a winner like the money team. All eyes are on me, and at the end of the day, just have victory, cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner.
I'm a winner.
Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. Cause I'm a winner. I'ma be all right.
I'ma win this fight.
I'ma win this fight.
I'ma be all right.
I'ma be all right. I'ma win this fight. I'ma be alright. And I'ma win this fight. I'ma be alright. And I'ma win this fight. Now, life is full of hardest pains and adversity, and you haven't lived one day of my life, so don't judge me. I know I'm in a battle, it's the fight of my life, and if it go the distance, I'ma still win this fight, because every day I'm in a battle, natural eyes can see, with psychological, emotional enemies, and come what may, no matter what they say, I'm always moving forward, no surrender, no retreat, because I'm a winner.
Thank you, Bishop Leonard. Special. Got a program with
I'm a winner. I'm a winner. Because I'm a winner. Because I'm a winner. Because I'm a winner. Because I'm a winner.
Thank you, Bishop Leonard. You're all winners. Thanks for joining. I'm sorry we don't have enough time for Q&A for this, but if anyone needs to reach me with any questions about this program, it's easy. Gigi, G-I-G-I, at NAMIContraCosta.org. Gigi, G-I-G-I, at NAMIContraCosta.org, or by phone, 510-990-2670. Thanks for joining. I hope that this has been helpful to all of you who participated. I see names but no faces, but I appreciate you all for joining today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.